The Texas-Florida game has gotten so much more interesting in the last 24 hours, and not the least of which is because news is Jontay Cook is no longer with the University of Texas. This is a big deal. It is a big deal because Jontay Cook was one of the more highly touted players in the 2023 class and was outstanding at DeSoto and was also really vocal in putting that class together and helping Arch Manning get to Texas. Now, you could say that Arch Manning was always going to go to Texas, but there was a time there where it didn't feel like Texas was going to win out. There was even talk about whether or not he would end up at Clemson or Georgia. And now, kind of know that the guys that he was probably going to grow up with is leaving as they're in the middle of trying to chase the SEC championship and perhaps the national championship later this year. But Jontay Cook, 6 foot, 185 pounds, was expected to be one of the go-to guys in this receiver rotation, no matter who it was, but it just hasn't gone that way. It's been Matthew Golden. It's been Silas Bolden. It's been Isaiah Bond when he is healthy. And I think really the guy that kind of boxed Cook out of more opportunities is DeAndre Moore, who played really, really well when Arch Manning was on the football field, and there seemed to be a really great kinship there. I thought the Inside Texas story that originally broke this news had an excerpt that people are going to pick up on, which is, we don't need to divulge the locker room part of his separation, but you can read into that what you would like. Usually when people talk about locker room, they're talking about interpersonal politics. They're talking about chemistry between teammates. They're talking about what you are going to be like when people are around you, right? Do they like being with you? Do you like being with them? But I think if his production was as high as it was expected to be at this point, there would be no need to enter the portal. There would be no need for locker room conversation. He's got 8 catches this season, guys. It's really difficult for a receiver to make an impact on a football team when he's only got 8 catches. And the understanding here is that it's mutual, right? That they both think that it is time for Jontay Cook to move on and for Texas to part with Jontay Cook at this particular juncture. This is also another significant player that will be entering the portal in the last couple of years that I thought was going to be central to what Texas is going to do, going forward. Malik Murphy being one of those guys, and Quinn Ewers comes back, takes a job. I thought, Malik Murphy's going to sit there behind Quinn Ewers and maybe even make this a little bit more difficult for Arch Manning down the line, but that's not how I went. He went to Duke, and he's doing really well, right? Duke is 6-3. They had an 11-point lead against Miami that they blew on the road, and in part is because he was able to throw touchdown passes or he's able to throw interceptions. Jontay Cook is going to be one of the more sought-after players in college football when the portal opens on December 9th for folks that aren't grad transfers. For grad transfers, you can go in as soon as you want, right? That's just what it is. And I think if you're graduating in the fall, like if you graduate in December, you can go in, right? So expect the transfer portal to get on and popping with guys that have their degrees really quickly, especially as we get closer and closer to this place where you're definitely going to have a winning season. You're definitely going to have a losing season. You're definitely going to go bowling or not. And whether or not that's important to you. The idea of making business decisions a little bit later on down the line is coming into play here, guys. Guys that expect to go to the NFL might just shut it down if their team sucks. Guys that expect to go to the NFL might just shut it down if their team doesn't make the college football playoff. Guys that are going to go to the NFL might not be available for the rivalry game Thanksgiving week, right? That's what we're looking at now. And I think knowing that you're not going to have Jontay Cook is going to affect Texas. But it's not going to affect Texas like the return of DJ Lagway would affect Florida. Some really positive information from Billy Napier since Lagway needed to be carted off with a hamstring injury that we thought was significant, that Billy Napier thought was pretty significant at the time, that seems to be not as significant as they thought, and he got some positive feedback on Monday, and he was at practice on Wednesday, which, again, great news, because that means you get to put DJ Lagway at quarterback and not Aiden Warner. And Aiden Warner, when called, man, doing the emergency quarterback thing against the best defense in the country, or I'd say the most talented defense in the country, that's tough work, man. But he did it, and they tied the game with him at quarterback. Imagine if they had Lagway to finish that game. Do you pull off the upset against Georgia? Perhaps. And if you could pull off the upset against Georgia, knowing that Georgia did upset Texas, maybe you believe that you got a shot to go into DKR and steal a victory from a Texas team that expects to compete for national championships later this year, and you could scuttle their opportunity to play for the SEC championship. Like right now, we're still looking at 5 teams that are tied for first place in the SEC. There's going to be some separation that happens. LSU, Bama, they're playing this weekend. That's huge, right? To say nothing of Texas, Florida this weekend. That's huge. Georgia, Ole Miss is huge. And, in those 2 games alone, you basically had elimination games for the college football playoff. And I don't think that a 2-loss Texas is completely out of a college football playoff situation, but it does feel like it would be really, really difficult for them to get in ahead of, say, an 11-1 Penn State, which is what we would expect Penn State to do the rest of the way. It would be difficult for them to get in against what we think is an 11-1 Indiana, right? I also am going to be very curious about how we talk about SMU down the line, because this is probably going to be a talking point for me going forward. I think SMU is going to get into the top 10 this week if they continue to take care of their business. And there's good reason to believe that, and they have done more than enough to show that they're one of the better teams in the country. And they can do this off a bye, right? Because they're on a bye. But they're going to finish with Boston College, Virginia, and California. Their best win this season is stomping out an undefeated Pitt 48-25. Their loss is to an undefeated and top 10 BYU. Now, who is Penn State's best win? Illinois. Who is Texas's best win? Arguably, Oklahoma. Who is the better win for SMU? I think it's that undefeated Pitt. So if you're talking about Texas taking the loss to Georgia, meaning more than SMU taking the loss to BYU, maybe, right? But Georgia took the loss to Bama, and Bama took the loss to Tennessee and Vanderbilt. I think we really need to take a look at that. So when I'm doing my top 25 later this weekend, I've already thought that SMU might end up in there right next to Indy when I'm talking about who's going to be in my top 10 and whether or not we should continue to talk about some of these SEC programs getting into this thing is if Southern Methodist just continues to take care of its business. And I think, Texas wants to stay in the spot. They want to stay at the number 5 ranking. They're going to have to beat Florida going away, especially if there's no DJ Lagway. But I want to jump on here because the news of Jontay Cook going in there also is going to have a lot of teams that are at the top of this thing looking for him. Like, I would not be shocked to sign. He entertains conversations from Alabama, from Tennessee, from Georgia, from even friggin' Ohio State, honestly, man. He's a player. And as soon as you get that dude on your squad, you get to get better in a hurry. So we'll watch the space and see where he takes his visits to see where he lands.